in 1991 with 51 goals and 104 points. And back then, just to even get 15 goals is tough in NHL. Theo got 51. Theo also made 7 NHL All-Star appearances over his career. Theo is an honorary chief, bundle holder, pipe carrier. Theo is Métis Cree, and his grandmother is Cree. His Aboriginal identity is central to his success story. 2009, Theo wrote a book. It became the bestseller in Sports Illustrated and in sports. The first book was Playing with Fire, and it did so good that he wrote a second book called Conversations with a Rattlesnake. Theo has been awarded the Canadian Humanitarian Award, the Queen's Jubilee Medallion. He's honorary chief, and he also a recipient of Aboriginal Inspire Award. And in 2014, Theo was awarded the honorary doctorate in science from the University of Ulf Humber for outstanding contributions to mental health of Canadians. Most recently, Theo was bestowed with a second honorary doctorate in laws from Brandon University in recognition for his contributions combating child sexual abuse, for his outstanding efforts to promote healing and recovery. Theo pursues excellence in all areas in life. And at this time, we'd like to honor Theo with the honor song. And we invite, ladies and gentlemen, Theo Fleury to come up as we sing his honor song.
Morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good? Still asleep, I see. Thank you, Chief Tony, for inviting me to this amazing conference. I started my journey in 2009 after I wrote my book, Playing with Fire. And in 2003, I got kicked out of the NHL because I couldn't stop drinking, I couldn't stop doing drugs, and my behavior was completely out of control, okay? And I had been carrying around a secret for 27 years of my life, okay? And we have a saying, you're only as sick as your secrets. Well, I was sick physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And in 2009, when I wrote this book, I exposed that secret that I've been carrying around. And as a young phenom hockey player, I ran into a coach and a scout who basically promised me a one-way ticket to the NHL if I followed his tutoring. And I was a part of the very first ever bantam draft that was held in the Western Hockey League. And I got picked in the second round by the Winnipeg Warriors, who are now the Moose Jaw Warriors. And so the summer after I got drafted, this coach came to my house, sat me and my mom and dad around the kitchen table, and basically said, we think Theo needs better competition, better coaching, et cetera, we would love for him to move to Winnipeg. And my parents knew from an early age what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be, and I wanted to someday play in the NHL. So when I was 15 years old, I moved to Winnipeg. And needless to say, that choice and that decision would change me for the rest of my life. Because over the next 2.5 years, this particular coach would rate me 150 times over this 2.5-year period. And so what I was left with was a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, and there wasn't one person I could have told. Because I knew if I told, first and foremost, I wouldn't be believed, and second of all, I knew that that would be the end of my hockey career because I would be labeled as a liar and a troublemaker. So like I said, I kept this secret inside for 27 years. And I have been in this space for almost 20 years. I've been working in the field of trauma, mental health, and addiction for almost 20 years. And I believe that trauma is at the core of every single issue we have in society starts with unresolved trauma. And then you pick your poison as to how you are going to cope with the pain that's left behind from these experiences, okay? So as little people, we get traumatized. Leaves us in emotional pain and suffering. And what is emotional pain and suffering? Mental illness. And like I said, so how do we deal with this emotional pain and these emotional scars that are left behind from trauma? We gravitate towards the dark side of life and get involved in addictive behavior as a coping mechanism to suppress the emotional pain and scars that are left behind. Alcohol, drugs, food, sex, gambling, etc., etc. And so, as a society, we're very aware that there is a mental health epidemic on the planet. We're very aware that there's an addiction epidemic on the planet. Well, we've done a really poor job of talking about the catalyst which brings us into these two spaces, and that's trauma. Okay? For example, Bell Let's Talk is one of the biggest mental health campaigns in the whole entire world. And they start the campaign out with 1 in 5 Canadians suffer from mental illness. And I'm like, why are we singling out the one person and shaming the one person? Because that's only adding to the stigma. And what are we actually talking about? We're talking about trauma. What happened to you? We don't ask that question. What happened to you? What happened to you? Because nobody ever asked me, you know? When I was playing in the NHL, nobody ever asked me, why is your behavior so out of control? What happened to you? Nobody ever gave me the permission to tell my story. Nobody ever gave me the permission. And if we're going to get out of this epidemic of mental illness and addiction, we got to talk about the trauma. We got to talk about the trauma. Because if you don't talk about the trauma, it stays in place. It stays in place. And it doesn't move. Right? It doesn't move. We don't get to release it. Right? And as a society, we haven't created any safe spaces for people to talk about their traumatic experiences. Right? Why? Because we're all afraid of being judged. That's why we don't talk about what we need to talk about, is we're so afraid of being judged. We're so afraid of being judged. But do you know most men who've been sexually abused commit suicide? Most men who've been sexually abused commit suicide. It's a proven fact. All of our men that are incarcerated and in prison, most of those men have been sexually abused, or physically abused, or emotionally abused, or spiritually abused, or sexually abused. Right? So we become very angry and resentful people. And so what do? We take it out on society, we take it out on our families, we take it out on the people that we love the most. Because we're angry. We're angry. And we're resentful. So when I was playing for the New York Rangers, I went to a treatment facility in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I spent 30 days at a trauma treatment facility. And I ended up actually moving to Santa Fe and lived there for 4 years. And after I got kicked out of the NHL, I'd been up for, I think it was about 7 or 8 days. I hadn't had any sleep, and I was sitting at home one day, and I just said to myself, you know, I just don't want to be. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be on this planet. And so I jumped in my truck and I drove down to the local pawn shop in Santa Fe, and. You know, I just finished making $50 million in my hockey career. And so I never left the house with no less than $5,000 in cash in my pocket, because after one drink, I could never predict what was going to happen. So I always made sure I had lots of resources. So I walk into the pawn shop, I take this big wad of cash out of my pocket and I slam it on the table. And I say to the proprietor, I said, I need a gun and some bullets. 45 seconds later, I'm back in my truck with the gun and the bullets heading home. And I got home and I had this amazing home theater room in my house with a massive coffee table, so I put the gun and the bullets down. I poured out a whole bunch of cocaine a la Scarface, grabbed a bottle of vodka, drank a third of the vodka, chopped up a bunch of lines, snorted a bunch of lines, and sat there and reflected on my life. All the amazing things that happened, all the horrible things that happened were like a movie playing in my head. And about 45 minutes later, I got up enough courage, I grabbed the gun, loaded the gun, put the gun in my mouth. And I remember it rattling against my teeth. I remember what it tasted like, and still this movie's playing in my head. And then right at the moment of truth, when it was time for me to pull the trigger and end my life, this little voice in my head said, "You've never quit anything in your life, why are you quitting now?" And that allowed me to take the gun and throw it into the desert. And I had two choices that day. Was I gonna die or was I gonna live? Well, I chose to live, but guess what? I have no clue how to live life on life's terms. All I know how to do is cope. Whether I'm happy, sad, mad, glad, all I know it's a feeling, and I certainly know how to make it go away. Okay? So about 2 weeks after the gun incident, I get a call from my oldest son, Josh, who's living in Calgary. And he said, "Hey Dad, what the hell are you doing in Santa Fe?" He says, "Why don't you get your ass back to Calgary? Because my brothers and sisters, we need a dad. We need you back in our lives." And so I packed up everything in my truck. I drove 22 hours back to Calgary, and I knew, because I kind of knew if I was going to get my life straightened around, it was going to happen in Calgary. Because my kids were there, my ex-wives were there, my old teammates were there, my friends were there, so I knew that that's where I needed to be. So I get back to Calgary, I get involved back with my old friends, and it's like party central again. So one night I was in the washroom on my hands and knees, crying. I just punched 7 holes in my bathroom wall. And I knew if I kept going down the road that I was going to go down, that I was going to die. Okay? And not a quick death. I was going to die the old alcoholic, drug addict, lonely, angry, resentful death. That's where I was headed. And I'd been around 12-step for a long time. I've been going in and out of 12-step. And I remember this old timer in one of the meetings that I used to go to in Santa Fe. He said to me one night, he said, "Do you realize in this program that you get to pick your own God?" And I was like, pick my own God, huh? Interesting. So here I was in the washroom on my hands and knees, and I said, okay, I'm going to have it out with God. So I went up one side of God, I went down the other side of God. I called him absolutely every single name in the book I could think of. I made up a couple of my own. And then I said to God, I go, "God, I realize you only give me as much as I can handle." I said, "I'm full." I said, "I'm full." I said, "You cannot put one more thing on my plate." And then at the end of the conversation, I said, "Please, please, God, take away the obsession to drink and do drugs." And I went to bed. Next morning, I got up, and as I was walking to the washroom, in my bathroom, I had this very large mirror. And as I'm rubbing the sleep out of my eyes, I glance out of the corner of my eye, and I stop dead in my tracks. And I can't remember the last time that I looked at myself in the mirror. Because I was so full of shame, so full of guilt, so full of anger, so full of resentment. I can't remember the last time that I actually looked at myself in the mirror. So I'm staring at myself. 5 minutes goes by, 10 minutes goes by, 15 minutes goes by, and I start to feel different. Finally, about 40 minutes goes by, and I go, holy shit. I said, my prayer was answered. And that was September 18th of 2005, and I haven't had a drink or a drug since. So when I left hockey, all I had was a grade 12 diploma from Vanier Collegiate in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. And I had more than half my life left to live, and I had no idea what the rest of my life was going to look like. No idea. Because I had focused the first part of my life getting to the NHL, becoming a superstar, all these things. That when I left the game, I had no idea what the hell the rest of my life was going to look like. So I show up at a Flames golf tournament, Flames alumni golf tournament, and I meet this gentleman who used to be an old reporter that used to cover the team when I played there. And the first thing he said to me, he says, "What are you doing these days?" I said, "I'm doing absolutely nothing. I'm doing nothing." So we kind of go back and forth and we make small talk. And at the end of the conversation, I say to him, "Do you know anybody that'd be interested in writing a book with me?" And he says, "Funny you should ask." He says, "My wife is a writer." I was like, "Oh wow, this is perfect," right? So 3 days after that conversation, I met with Kirsty, and then 3 days later, we started writing Playing with Fire, my autobiography. Okay? Now, when I sat down to write the book, the only thing I was going to talk about was my hockey career. Okay? Wasn't going to talk about my parents. Wasn't going to talk about my sexual abuse. Wasn't going to talk about my drink-a-log and my drug-a-log. I was just going to talk about my hockey career. But early on in the process of writing this book, this lady that I was writing the book with, she made me feel safe, and I trusted her. So 3.5 years later, we finished the book, and I tell the whole story from start to finish. Okay? So 4 days before I'm going to Toronto to launch this book, I am shitting in my pants. And I'm so scared because I have no idea how you are going to react to what's in this book, right? And I also knew that I was going to go do a whole bunch of media surrounding the book. And I knew that the only thing that the media would be interested in would be the gory details of my sexual abuse. Okay? So, because I'm a very smart and bright guy, I spent 4 days on my computer researching every single thing I could find on the subject of child sexual abuse. Because I wanted to get a story of hope and healing and recovery out to the masses. So I go to Toronto. First 4 days I'm there, I do 300 interviews. TSN, Sportsnet, every magazine, every newspaper, every morning show, every radio show. And just like I predicted, the only thing they were interested in was the gory details of my sexual abuse. But I'd spent 25 years in the media being interviewed every single day. So I knew that I never had to answer the reporters' questions directly. So I had my own agenda. And I had 5 or 6 main points that I got across in every single interview. So I got this story of hope and healing and recovery out to the masses. So then the next thing on the itinerary was the first book signing. Okay? And my expectations for this book were really low. I was like, nobody's going to read this book. I'm not Wayne Gretzky, I'm not Mario Lemieux. I had a great career, but not like that. So the first book signing was at the biggest Indigo chapter store in all of Canada, downtown Toronto, on Yonge Street, 3-level store. And I walked through the front doors of the bookstore, fully expecting to sign 10 books and then leave. Okay? Well, I walked through the front doors of the bookstore, and there was 400 people standing in line with my book. And I'm like, what the hell are all these people doing here? Right? What are they doing here? So I sit down at the book table and I start signing books. And out of the corner of my eye, I spot this guy in line. and he's got my book clutched against his chest, and his face is buried in the floor, and he's walking really slow. And his t-shirt's ripped, his sweatpants are dirty, his hair's greasy, and I'm like, I wonder what's up with this guy. So I follow him all the way in the line. He gets to the front of the line, puts the book on the table, looks me in the eye, and says, "Me too." Says, "Me too." Now you remember how I said I had no idea what the rest of my life was going to look like? Well, that guy showed up at the book signing to deliver a spiritual message of 2 simple words. Me too. Me too. Well, you know what happened after that? I got completely run over by people. Everywhere I went. 5, 10, 15, 20 people were coming up at every speaking engagement, every workshop I was doing, every appearance I was doing. People were coming up saying, "Hey man, I read your book. You told my story. Me too. Hey, I saw your documentary. You told my story. Me too. Me too, me too, me too, me too." Everywhere I went, me too. So I went right across Canada. And I realized that something that I thought was uncommon, which is sexual abuse, is not only uncommon, it is incredibly common. And there's just as many men as there are women who have been sexually abused. Okay? So, 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 5 boys, which is 2/8. 2/8 is 1/4. And there's 500 people in here right now, so do the math. Do the math. 1 out of every 4 people before the age of 18 will have some unwanted sexual experience. And in the 16 years I've been doing this, I bet you I've had over 1 million people either directly or indirectly say those 2 words. Me too. Me too. So as soon as I was done the book tour, my phone started ringing, saying, "Hey Theo, you speak publicly about your sexual abuse?" I'm like, I haven't really done a whole lot of public speaking, but I've been around, I've been in the media for a long time. I said, "Sure, why not?" And guess who were the first people that called me? You guys. Indigenous people called me, said, "Hey, can you come to my community?" And what was really interesting was I was supposed to be there to help you guys, okay? But you know what happened? The reverse happened. And he introduced me to a little thing called spirituality. Spirituality. And in the addiction space, guess what? If you don't have spirituality, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make it if you don't have a spiritual base. And this has been proven over and over and over and over again. Okay? So one of the first things he gave me was a little smudge kit. He told me about meditation and prayer and cleaning myself off. Then he took me to my first sweat lodge, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is the greatest thing I've ever been a part of." And then he told me that the grandfathers and the grandmothers and the Creator left a whole bunch of tools behind. Because we're going to need them to heal. the drum, the rattle, the smudge, the sweat lodge, the powwow, the Sundance. The tools to heal all of that trauma that we've experienced. They left those behind for us to pick them up and use them. And you know what? All I did is I went and I picked up the tools and I started to use them. And guess what happened? My spiritual life went to the next level. It went to the next level. And all of that trauma and hurt and anger and resentment slowly started to fade away. Started to fade away. Because I have a theory of why they created the residential school, right? They're trying to take the Indian out of the Indian, right? And they were going to abuse us, neglect us, do all of these things to us. Because when they came up upon us and they discovered us, they were like, oh my God, look at these people. They share everything. They take care of each other. And the church was like, how are we going to have an impact here? How are we going to force our beliefs on them? Well, they created the residential school. But guess what? They failed. They failed because we're still here. And we're still using our tools. So every time I speak, I talk about the tools. Talk about the smudge, talk about the drum, talk about the rattle, talk about the sweat lodge, talk about the powwow, talk about the Sundance. Because when we decide collectively as a whole that we're going to use these tools, all that power we lost, we're going to get it all back. And not only we're going to get it back, we're going to become powerful again. Very powerful. Because today I can tell you I'm as powerful as I've ever been in my whole entire life. Why? Because I have the Creator. Right? And my Indigenous name is a Blackfoot name from the Siksika Blackfoot tribe. It's Ikkinahputa, which means light falling snow. Snow flurry. Ha 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 ha. My Blackfoot brothers and sisters have a very good sense of humor. But it's the first snowfall that covers the earth and protects the earth. I'm very honored to carry this name with me everywhere I go, right? Because like I said, I had no idea. I had no idea what the rest of my life was going to look like. And in that washroom, September 17, 2005, I hit my knees and I surrendered. I surrendered. And I turned my will and my life over to the care of the Creator as I understand Him. Because left to my own defenses, left to me running my own life, is the biggest shit show on the planet when I'm running my own life. But when God runs my life, everything runs smoothly. Right? Because when I drive the bus always crashes. Always crashes. So I sit comfortably in the passenger seat and I don't question anything. I don't question anything. So when we decide to create space, hold space for trauma, guess what happens? Guess what happens? People heal. People heal, right? Like when I wrote my second book called Conversation with a Rattlesnake, I wrote it with an occupational therapist who has a degree in neuroscience. And we wrote this incredible book. And it's actually considered the greatest book ever written on the theory of attachment. And it's actually being used in 17 universities now as a textbook, teaching psychologists how to talk to their patients. So as soon as this book was done, we went out on tour. Her and I went out on tour. And we were doing one-day healing conferences all over Canada. So we just happened to be in Calgary at the Westin Hotel. We had 100 people in the room. Kim and I spent the morning creating a safe space and a safe environment for people because we were going to invite our audience into the conversation in the afternoon. Right before lunch, I noticed there was a guy sitting to the right of the stage, and I could tell by his nonverbal communication that he wanted to speak. Okay? So we went and had lunch, came back from lunch, and I said to the guy, I said, hey, I noticed that you were visibly engaged in conversation. I said, would you like to share something with the audience? Guy stands up and he says, I just want everybody to know that I've never felt this safe in a room in my whole entire life. And he said, I too have been carrying a secret around for a long, long time. And he says, I just want everybody in the audience to know that I molested my sister for 11 years. And all of the air just went right out of the room. Well, it just so happened that we had 3 women in our audience who had been molested by their brothers. You know what these 3 women did? They got up out of their seats, went over to this man and hugged him. And that's when I said to myself, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to facilitate this kind of healing. I want to facilitate this kind of healing. And it was absolutely incredible to witness that kind of healing. It was incredible. 4 people's lives were changed that day. And the other 96 witnessed vulnerability, safety, understanding, forgiveness, compassion, empathy. They witnessed that. And I said, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. That's the kind of healing I want to facilitate. So one of the things Kim asked me when I was writing the book was she asked me about forgiveness. She goes, how do you feel about forgiveness? I was like, I went on a 30-minute rant. Just anger and rage and all this stuff. She's like, stop right there. She goes, I just want you to think about forgiveness. Okay? So as we were writing the book, we set an intention that we wanted to go work in the prison system in Canada. And that has come to fruition. We've been to 25, 30 prisons now. We work with inmates. So we got invited to go to this place outside of Winnipeg. It's called Stony Mountain Penitentiary. It's one of the biggest prisons in Canada. Okay? It's got a minimum, medium, and maximum security prison. So we have like 400 of the baddest dudes on the planet in our audience. Okay? Murderers, rapists, child molesters, bank robbers, you name it. They're all in our audience. And then we had the 200 people who work with these guys, okay? And these 200 people are more traumatized than the actual inmates are because they got to work with these guys, okay? On a daily basis. So you can pretty much just cut the trauma with a knife in that room. So we have this amazing conversation going, and these guys are popping up and telling us all their stories, you know. Like I have like maybe 20 layers of trauma in my story. These guys have like 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 layers of trauma in their stories. And 70% of them are Indigenous. Okay? But what these guys are is they're just sad little boys. They're just sad little boys. Because their whole lives they've been abandoned, neglected, abused physically, emotionally, spiritually, you know? So we're having this incredible conversation. And I look out in the audience, and there's a kid sitting in the back row, and he can't even sit in his chair. He's just moving around, and he's fully engaged in the conversation. So I say to him, I say, you got something to say? Kid stands up, looks exactly like Eminem the rapper. Okay? He's got the flat beak cap, tattoos, you know, and he's like street, you know. First thing out of his mouth, he says, Theo Fleury says, you're my hero. Wow. And he says, as you can see, he says, I'm not the biggest guy in the world. And he said, I used to be a really great hockey player. And I grew up on the north end of Winnipeg, bad area of town. He said, when I was 14, he said, I started selling drugs. And he said, I've been in and out of jail ever since. Then he says, you'll never guess who I was with 3 weeks ago in Grant Cache, Alberta. I said, I don't know. Who were you with? He said, I was with Graham James. The guy that abused me, he was in jail with my abuser. And he said, Theo, because you're my hero, he said, my sole intent while I was in that prison was I was going to beat the shit out of this guy for you. Okay? But he said Graham is very heavily guarded because everybody wants to beat the shit out of this guy. Okay? So he said, I waited, and I waited, and I waited. He said, I got my chance. He said, the guards left his room. I went into his room. He wasn't there. He said, I walked over to the left side of the bed. Wasn't there. So I walked over to the right side of the bed, and there he was. Curled up in a ball in the fetal position in the corner of his room. And the kid goes, I didn't do anything. You know what I said to the kid? I said, you're my hero for not doing anything. You remember Kim said, think about forgiveness? Here's my chance. Here's my chance. Because somebody who's curled up in a fetal position in a ball, that person's in pain and that person is suffering. And in that moment, I actually had compassion and empathy for my abuser. I had compassion and empathy for my abuser. And I got to detach from that situation for the rest of my life. Because in that moment, I got to forgive myself. I got to forgive myself. Not him. I got to forgive myself. And it was magical and beautiful. Right? And that's the kind of healing we got to do. That's the kind of healing we got to do. That's the kind of healing we got to do. And guess what? You guys have the greatest untapped resource of medicine on the planet. You guys. You haven't. You want to talk about reconciliation? There it is. There it is. We have the power to heal the whole entire planet. Think about it. You do. Because you took this poor little broken Métis boy. You taught him spirituality. And somebody who hated himself, had so many secrets, was broken. He gave him his life back. He gave me my life back. I've been to over 450 of the 630 First Nations communities in Canada. And it's you guys that have given me my life back. You guys. So don't forget that. Don't forget that. You are more powerful than you can possibly imagine because of your medicine. Think about that when you leave here. Think about that when you go back to your communities. Guess what? If you have trauma, if you have mental illness, if you have addiction issues, you're in the majority. You're not in the minority. You're in the majority. It's part of life. Why do you think the Creator gives us adversity? Why do they give us adversity? Why does He give us adversity? To build resilience. To build resilience. And once you have resilience, bring it the fuck on. Bring it on. Bring it on. Okay? Bring it on. And what I've noticed about our community is we have probably the most resilient people on the planet. Because they tried to wipe us out. And we're still here. We're still here, right? And all of you that are here are leaders. 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 Right? That's why you're here. Right? There's no coincidence in God's world, in the Creator's world. We're all here because we're supposed to be here. This is exactly where we're supposed to be. Right here, right now. Right? Because the Creator and the grandfathers and the grandmothers want you to go home after being at this conference and take a leadership role and bring the healing to the communities. Right? That's what your job is. Because there has been no better time in the history of this planet that it's all about healing. It's all about healing. Right? 100,000 years of trauma. Right? Intergenerational trauma. It's time to heal. It's time to heal. Time to heal. Right? And as you notice, it's really quiet in here. It's pretty rare. Right? Well, this is how you do it. Right? I've spent $1 million on therapy. I've done 10,000 hours of therapy. Every kind of therapy known to mankind, I've done it. But you know what the cheapest, most effective kind of therapy is? Group therapy. Right? And that's what we're doing today, right now. It's called group therapy. Because you use vulnerability. You know what vulnerability is? Storytelling. I'm telling you a story. And you know why it's so quiet? Because you're holding space for me to tell you guys this story. So I feel comfortable. Right? So if you can do that for a complete stranger like I am, why can't you do it for each other? Right? And that's how you do it. Because vulnerability creates safety. And then once you have safety in the room, guess what happens? People start popping up, telling their story. Because why? They don't feel alone. They don't feel judged. They feel loved. Right? And how many of us as little people didn't feel loved? Majority of us. Right? Which then set us up for abusers. Right? Sets us up for abusers. Sets us up to be abused. And you know what? I discovered 4 things when I was writing the second book about what trauma teaches us. Okay? It teaches us 4 things that become the core of who we think we are as human beings. First one is abandonment and neglect. Right? No matter what relationship I'm in, that person's going to leave me. They're going to leave me. They're going to leave me. Second one, I'm not good enough. Not good enough. Third one, I'm not lovable. Fourth one, which is our fentanyl, opioid, and heroin users. Do I even exist in the world? So, I'm not a fan of Big Pharma. Okay? I'm not a fan of Big Pharma. You know what Big Pharma did? They knew that we're all fucked up in relationships and we couldn't connect to each other. And for the last 4 years, guess what we've been drinking? Cortisol milkshakes. You know what cortisol is? Cortisol is the stress hormone that we produce in our bodies. Fear. Fear, 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 fear is the propaganda. Fear. Okay? And cortisol actually can fray the nervous system. It's so toxic, so acidic. But you know what the counter drug to that is? And we produce it. It's called oxytocin. Oxytocin. You know what oxytocin is? The drug of love and connection. And oxytocin's job is to go in and suck up all the cortisol. That's its job. So Big Pharma created a drug called Oxycontin. And if you look at oxytocin and Oxycontin underneath the microscope, they look exactly the same. Except Oxycontin has one little extra arm on it that makes us addicted, and we need more and more and more of it, right? And I work with a lot of fentanyl, heroin users, you know, opioid users, and I say to them, why are you guys so crazy about this stuff? You know what they say? It gives me the warm and fuzzies. So a drug has replaced relationship. Why do you think we have an opioid crisis on the planet? Because we can't connect. Because of these stupid things. Can't connect. Right? Because nobody taught us how to be in healthy, productive relationships. right? So just think about that. Think about that, right? But guess what? When I go in a sweat lodge, oh boy, oxytocin, whew. Right? Big time oxytocin in the sweat lodge, right? Powwow when we're dancing, right? Oxytocin, right? Sundance, woo. Wow, powerful medicine, right? Synthetic medicine has been the greatest failure in human history. Synthetic medicine. But our medicine? Oh, yeah. Give me lots of that. Give me as much of that as I can handle. Right? That's powerful. That's spiritual. That's connected. Right? Because when you're connected to the Creator and you're connected to Source, you're never alone. Right? My biggest fear was being alone. Couldn't be alone. I'm not alone anymore because I'm connected to the Source and connected to the Creator, grandfathers, grandmothers. Right? So, we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to tell you a story about a frog. Okay? So, I went to a place called Bella Coola, British Columbia. Anybody ever been there? If you haven't been there, you got to go there. It is one of the most beautiful, spiritual, incredible places I've ever been to. Okay? So I'm going there to speak at a sexual abuse conference they're having. And there's only one way into Bella Coola and one way out. Okay? So I fly in, I get off the plane, this young man comes up to meet me and says, "My name is Chris." I go, "Oh, nice to meet you, Chris." I go, what do you do here in your community? He says, I'm the local historian. I was like, "How old are you?" He's like, "Well, I'm 24. I'm like, "Really? Okay. You're 24 years old and you're the local historian for the community." He's like, "Yep." He said, "My grandfather was the guy, he just recently passed, and now he passed on all this knowledge, and I'm the guy." He's like, "Okay." He says, "What are you doing today?" He says, I said, "Well, I don't know. I'm probably just going to go up to my room, check in, get ready for tomorrow." He says, "Would you like to go on a hike?" It's like, "Wow, yeah, let's go." So I go to the hotel, change, come back out. We get in this car and we drive towards the mountains. So we get out of the car and we start hiking up this mountain. And right beside where we're walking the path, there's a stream, like roaring stream, where you can just reach in and drink the water. It's that pure. So we hike and we hike and we hike and we come to this clearing where there's all these carvings of animals that have been traced back hundreds of thousands of years. Okay? So he starts explaining what each animal means in his culture. So I'm standing there and I look down and there's a frog right there. So he says to me, he goes, "You ever seen a frog hop backwards?" I'm like, "Can't say that I have." I said, he said, "The frog looks to the left, the frog looks to the right, but it's always going straight ahead." And I was like, "Oh my God, I'm the frog," right? Because I lived my whole entire life in my past, in my pain, in my suffering, in the abuse, right? So I was like, oh, I'm the frog. So I don't think anything of it other than it's a great story. So fast forward 9 months later, I'm in Winnipeg at a place called the Thunderbird House. Okay? And did you guys know there's a sweat lodge on Main Street in Winnipeg, Manitoba? There's a sweat lodge. Okay? So I show up the day before, and they said, hey, we're doing a sweat tonight. You want to do a sweat? I'm like, yeah, I do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I go to this sweat. It's like every other sweat, beautiful, amazing, spiritual, beautiful songs, you know. So the next day, I'm on stage and I'm telling this story about this frog. As soon as I'm done speaking, the guy who ran the sweat the night before grabs the mic out of my hand and says, you'll never guess who walked into the sweat lodge last night. I go, I don't know. He said, a frog. Frog spirit came into the sweat lodge. So they shut the whole conference down, they do the sacred ceremony, and they present me with a pipe. So I'm a pipe carrier. But I was like, I don't want the pipe. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with this thing, and I don't know if I'm ready for that. They said, don't worry, we'll teach you. I was like, okay, no problem. So now, this frog is following me everywhere I go. Okay? I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I check into my hotel at 11 o'clock at night, put my key in the door, open the door, it's dark. So I'm fumbling around looking for a light. I flick the light beside my bed. There's a frog right there. Right beside my bed. So then I'm up in northern Alberta, BC, Alberta border. I'm visiting a Métis community, so my people. Yeah. Fiddlers and jiggers. Did you know my grandfather's the Manitoba fiddling champion and my grandmother was the Manitoba jigging champion? So we're going to do a sweat up there. So I'm talking to one of the spiritual guys that's going to be in the sweat, and I'm telling him this story about this frog. He says to me, he goes, does your daughter have asthma? I'm like, yeah. He goes, I go, how did you know? He goes, I know everything. He said, you know those guys, you know, right? So sure enough, springtime in Calgary, my daughter's like 4 years old, and we're playing outside, and this frog hops by. So I capture the frog, I take her upstairs in the bedroom, I light a smudge, say a prayer, put the frog on my daughter's chest. My daughter doesn't have asthma anymore. So the reason why I tell that story is you have absolutely no idea. When you surrender and turn your will and your life over to God, what kind of journey God is going to take you on. The Creator is going to take you on. Right? And, you know, in 2009 I told my story. Right? I told my story to the whole entire world. And I had no idea what the hell I was getting myself into. Like, none. Right? But what happened is it turned into this incredible, beautiful ending. Happy ending. Right? It has a happy ending. An incredible ending. Right? You know? And all I was just willing to do whatever it took to feel better. To feel better. That's it. I just wanted to feel better. I didn't want to be angry. I didn't want to be lonely. I didn't want to be all of those things. Right? Because for the majority of my life, I lived in emotional pain and suffering my whole entire life. Right? And I didn't think that there was going to be a solution to my pain, right? And then you guys asked me to come and share my story in your communities, and then all of a sudden, wow, you showed me these tools, right? These just simple, basic tools. And I picked them up and I started using them, and then all of a sudden, I started to feel better, right? I actually started to cry, right? Because that's the opposite of anger. Sadness is the opposite of anger, right? And when you cry, get rid of the anger, get rid of the resentment, right? Like if you look up the definition of a warrior, warriors cry. They do, they're vulnerable. They have to be. That's how they're leaders, right? Like if you lead with ego, it's not going to turn out very well for you, right? We got a perfect example of that in Ottawa right now, right? What happens when you lead with ego, right? So vulnerability is the key, right? And guess what? You get to tell your story whichever way you want. Why? Because it's your story. It's nobody else's story. It's your story. And the people that are jealous and, jump all over you, you just triggered the fuck out of them. That's all. Right? That's all it is, right? That's all it is. So, amazing. It's an amazing time to be alive. It really is. It really is. Right? And what the Creator is telling us is it's time to heal. Right? It's time to heal. Right? Because in the next life, I don't want to deal with this shit. Right? I don't want to deal with this shit. Right? Next life, I want to have a nice, calm, peaceful, right? And I believe that any kind of mental illness is overcome. You can overcome it. Right? You can overcome it. Yeah. There we go. You can overcome it, right? You can overcome it. But you can't do it by yourself. Can't do it by yourself. And you need community to get through it. Right? That's it. Very simple. Tell your story. Tell your story. The world needs to hear your story. They need to hear it. Right? They need to hear it. They need to hear it. We need to love each other. Right? We need to love each other. Right? That's the way out of this shit show right now. Is love. It's love. Right? No more jealousy. No more. Jealousy's like cancer. It's like a cancer. Right? Ugly. Ugh. It is. It's ugly. Ugly. Oh, deadly. Right? Right? So, amazing initiative. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you for allowing me to open up this incredible conference, and take what you've learned in the next 3 days and take it home with you. Take it into your heart, into your soul, and go heal your communities, because I guarantee you that's what they want. They want to heal. Right? They just don't know how. They just don't know how. So you guys can be, everybody's experienced trauma in their life. Guess what? You're a healer. You're a healer. That's why God gave you trauma. Right? Because They knew you'd get through it, and now you can go heal people. All right? So again, thank you. Enjoy the next 3 days. Love you all. Thank you.
Darren, on behalf of our communities, our people, Indigenous Wellness Conference, we'd like to thank you very much for coming out. Thank you very much for your powerful words. Let's give Darren Fleury a round of applause. Awesome. Having said that, ladies and gentlemen, we ask you to give the presenters some time to themselves so they can wind down and have their downtime. He will